It was just after 9 p.m. when Elliot Sawyer saw the red and blue lights in his rearview mirror. The Georgia highway was empty, too quiet, just pine trees and shadows for miles. He slowed his rental car, blinked, and checked his speedometer again. Not speeding, not swerving, no reason. His pulse ticked up. The patrol cruiser behind him didn't wait. Lights flashing, siren off. Like this wasn't about safety, it was about something else. Something colder. Elliot sighed, signaled right, and pulled over onto the shoulder. Gravel crunched beneath his tires. This felt wrong. The cop door swung open. A heavy boot stepped out. Then another. Tall, wide, southern drawl, smug face. Aviators on even though it was pitch black. The officer approached slowly, hand resting on his holster like he'd practiced it. Elliot rolled down his window. Evening, officer. Is there a problem? No response. Just silence. Then, license and registration. Elliot reached into the glove box, calm, precise, and handed them over. The officer studied the documents like they offended him. You live in Atlanta? I do, but you're renting a car with Florida plates? Elliot raised an eyebrow. It's a business trip. Company policy. The officer didn't like that. Not the answer. Not the tone. Step out of the vehicle. What? Elliot asked, brows narrowing. Can you tell me why I'm being pulled over? Step out of the vehicle. The cold in the officer's voice cut like a blade. Elliot hesitated just for a beat, but he knew the drill. He'd memorized the rules a long time ago. Don't argue. Don't resist. Don't flinch. He opened the door and stepped out. Before he could ask another question, the officer grabbed his wrist. Click. A cuff locked tight around one wrist. What the hell? Elliot gasped. Click. The second one snapped shut. No Miranda rights. No explanation. Just a smirk. You match a description, the cop muttered. Elliot was silent. Not because he agreed, but because something told him this wasn't just another crooked stop. This was planned. He was shoved into the back of the cruiser. The door slammed shut. No more words. No radio chatter. No backup. Just the long, eerie ride to the station under the cover of night. Inside the precinct, the lights were dim and the air stale. The officer dumped Elliot in an interrogation room, left him cuffed to the table like some kind of threat. Elliot sat still, composed, watching the clock tick. 9:42 p.m., 9:56 p.m. Then at exactly 10:07 p.m., the door creaked open. A man in a sleek black suit walked in like he owned the building. The kind of confidence that didn't need a badge. Or maybe he thought he was above one. Grayson McCall, a white racist 40-year-old district attorney with a smug smile, slick back hair, gold cufflinks, looking polished and powerful. He was the kind of man who made speeches about justice while shaking hands with donors who paid to keep black men in jail. He had that same smug smile Elliot remembered from TV, slick back hair, gold cufflinks, the whole act. And beneath it all, the unmistakable glint of entitlement. He didn't sit. He didn't introduce himself. He just stood at the door, arms crossed. Well, he said, lips curling into a grin. Elliot Sawyer, we've been watching you. Elliot's gaze didn't waver. He said nothing. Grayson stepped closer, his voice lower now. Measured. You look surprised. I wasn't aware I had an audience, Elliot replied calmly. Grayson chuckled. Oh, come on now. You knew this was coming. All that squeaky clean background. It's always the ones who hide best. He circled the table like a vulture. You play smart, I'll give you that. But not smart enough. You left a trail, Sawyer. Elliot raised one brow just slightly. A trail of what, exactly? Grayson's smile faltered for a split second, like he hadn't expected pushback. But it came back, sharper this time. You're not as clean as you pretend to be. We've got you. Elliot tilted his head. Got me for what? Grayson leaned in. You'll see. Silence stretched. Elliot stared into the DA's eyes. Steady. Cold. Not blinking. Not afraid. Because he knew something Grayson didn't. Grayson was playing a game. But Elliot was the game. The door slammed shut behind McCall. Elliot sat alone in the room. The cuffs still on. But his mind? Already racing. He ran through the facts. The timing. The smugness. The DA showing up in person within the hour? This wasn't protocol. This was personal. And personal meant mistakes. They thought they'd caught him off guard. They thought they could bury him under a lie, but they just made their first, because Elliot Sawyer wasn't the one on trial. Meanwhile, outside the room, the smug officer leaned against the wall, arms folded. He nodded to Grayson as he exited. "You think he's the one?" Grayson smirked. "Oh, he's the one. Always thought he was better than everyone else. Just needed the right push." "You sure we shouldn't have waited?" Grayson's eyes narrowed. "No, we strike now, fast. Public arrest, big charges. We frame it right. We own the narrative." The officer grunted. "You planning a press release?" Grayson didn't answer. He just adjusted his cufflinks and started walking. "Get the paperwork ready. I want him booked for possession. Enough to stick." "But we didn't find anything in the car," the officer said. Grayson stopped, then looked over his shoulder with a slow, cold smile. "Then find something." Back inside, Elliot closed his eyes. Not to sleep, to remember. Every move, every face, every name tied to McCall's dirty empire. He wasn't here by accident. He had chosen this road, this town, this enemy. And now, the first piece had moved on the board. Let them play. Let them believe. Because Elliot Sawyer wasn't scared. He was ready. The charges came down hard. Cocaine, 2 vacuum seal bags, tucked under the passenger seat of the rental car, labeled as intent to distribute. Have you subscribed to our channel yet? Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. The news hit the precinct like a live wire. Grayson McCall, the DA, wasted no time. He strutted into the booking room, lips curled in victory, as Elliot Sawyer stood still, calm, cuffed, silent. "Make sure the press hears about this before midnight," Grayson ordered sharply. "Young black male, drugs, interstate trafficking. We need the mugshot trending." The booking officer hesitated. "Don't we need full evidence reports first?" Grayson's glare was enough to shut him up. "Just follow my lead. You won't walk out of here," McCall snapped. "He's going down. Hard." But even as Grayson barked his commands, cracks were already showing. Down the hallway, 2 officers stood near the evidence locker, whispering low. "You see the bags?" one asked. The other nodded. "Yeah, but here's the weird part." "What?" "No fingerprints. Not even on the outside plastic. It's clean." The first officer frowned. "You sure?" Lab confirmed. "Not even his." "And the car?" "Rental. Registered to some corporate fleet." The hallway went quiet. Then came the second whisper. "So why's McCall pushing this so fast?" No answer. Just uneasy silence. Because even in the building full of backdoor deals and dirty power plays, this felt off. Meanwhile, Elliot sat alone in the holding cell. He didn't speak, didn't pace, didn't demand a lawyer. He just watched. Every camera, every guard rotation, every moment. The silence around him wasn't fear. It was precision. He knew exactly what they thought he was. A target, a trophy, a win for McCall's campaign trail. But they hadn't done their homework. Because Elliot Sawyer didn't have a past they could dig into. Flashback, 3 months earlier. A cozy apartment on the edge of Atlanta. Small, quiet, spotless. Elliot's hands moved with slow control, folding clothes into a duffel, packing only what he needed, leaving behind what he didn't. No photos, no souvenirs, no memories. A new phone, wiped clean. The man in the mirror wasn't leaving town. He was erasing himself. Back in present day, the precinct lights flickered. Booking finished. Mugshot taken. Elliot never blinked once. Grayson stood behind the one-way glass with the police chief. "He fits the profile," Grayson said. "The silent ones always do. The ones who think they're too clean to get caught." The chief shifted. Still, no priors. No record. No red flags. His employer says he's a systems analyst. 5 years. Never late. Never sick. Grayson's smirk widened. Exactly. Too clean. That's the tell. Cut to Elliot's apartment. 1 week earlier. A fire crackled low in the fireplace. Papers fed the flame one sheet at a time. Birth certificate, utility bills, pay stubs, even childhood photos. All turned to ash. Elliot watched the smoke curl upward, face blank. Then, under his breath, he took the bait. The glow from the flames lit his eyes. Back at the precinct, a young officer named Delaney stared at the computer screen. She tapped a pen against her desk, confused. No social media? Her partner looked up. What? This guy, Elliot Sawyer. No Facebook. No Instagram. No Twitter. Nothing. Maybe he's private? No, it's not just that. It's surgically clean. Even his digital footprint's too perfect. The partner shrugged. So, Delaney lowered her voice. So maybe he's not who they think he is. At a local news station, 11:36 p.m., we interrupt your programming with breaking news out of Claiborne County. The mugshot flashed across the screen. Elliot Sawyer. Calm eyes. Neutral expression. Local officials confirmed the arrest of a man suspected in a multi-state drug operation. District Attorney Grayson McCall held a press conference moments ago. The camera cuts to Grayson. Slick, confident, practiced. This is a win for law and order, he said to the flashing cameras. We are cracking down on criminals who think they can hide behind clean records and false respectability. Elliot's image hovered behind him, and the city swallowed the lie. But back in the cell, Elliot didn't blink, because this was always part of the plan. Another flashback. 6 months ago, Elliot walked a quiet trail near a lake. Alone, head down. In his pocket, a photo of Grayson McCall shaking hands with a man now serving 20 years for a crime he didn't commit. The man's name, Terrence Ward, Elliot's cousin. Sit up. Framed. Convicted in less than a month. No appeal. No press. Just a whisper in the system. And the one name that came up again and again in the shadows? Grayson McCall. That was the beginning. Present day. Grayson paced his office like a lion waiting to feed. Tomorrow morning, I want every outlet running the headline, he told his assistant. Make sure they use the phrase, dangerous offender. We need the public scared. Yes, sir. And I want to speak directly to the mayor. Let's tie this to my anti-drug initiative. If we frame this right, I can push the new legislation by next month. He didn't see the tremble in her hands as she took notes. Didn't hear the doubt behind her polite yes. Because Grayson was blinded by ambition. He didn't realize the storm he'd just walked into. Back in Elliot's cell, footsteps approached. Keys turned in the lock. Time for your phone call, the guard said. Elliot stood, still calm, still quiet, still watching. In the holding room, Elliot picked up the phone, dialed a number from memory. The line clicked. No greeting, just silence. Then Elliot spoke. Phase 1 complete. They took the bait. Click. He hung up. No emotion, just precision. Grayson McCall wanted more. More power, more control, more headlines. He wasn't satisfied being the most feared district attorney in the southern counties of Georgia. He wanted the governor's mansion. And if he had to build that throne on broken backs and bloodstained courtrooms, so be it. The public saw charm. A southern gentleman. Polished. Ivy League smile. Press-ready speeches about law and order and cleaning up the streets. But behind the curtain, Grayson was running a war. And the battlefield? Black neighborhoods. In his office, Grayson leaned over a map of the state, pins marking counties like battle zones. An aide knocked. Sir, Channel 5 is asking if you'll speak again at the morning conference. Grayson waved it off. Later, I want that story marinating overnight. Let them stew in fear first. He stared at Elliot's mugshot on his screen. Calm, controlled, defiant. Grayson sneered. You think you're smarter than me, Mr. Sawyer? You're just another case number. But Elliot wasn't like the others. He wasn't shaking in his cell. He wasn't begging for a lawyer or shouting about injustice. No, he was watching, waiting, like a man who already knew how this would play out. Grayson's game had worked for years. His strategy was simple. Plant the drugs, forge the reports, lean on the scared cops in his pocket to back it all up, then stand in court with a straight face and say, ladies and gentlemen, here's another example of crime off our streets. It started slow. One setup, a deal that smelled wrong. A scared kid named Malik was the first. 19, no priors, framed with a stolen Glock and an ounce of crack. His mother swore he'd never touched a weapon, swore he was headed to college. Didn't matter. Grayson made sure Malik never saw the outside of a classroom again. 10 years. No appeal. Malik became a stat. And then it got easier. Grayson's conviction rate soared. His speeches got longer. His campaigns got louder. His donors got richer. And the network grew. Crooked cops, bent judges, dirty lab techs, Everyone got a slice of the power pie, and no one asked questions. They just did what Grayson told them, or they disappeared. Back in the precinct, Officer Delaney scrolled through case records on her break. She wasn't looking for anything. At least, that's what she told herself. But something about Elliot Sawyer was bothering her. Too clean, too convenient, and too familiar. She opened the archives, cross-referenced 3 years of cases filed by Grayson McCall's office. One pattern stood out. 91% of McCall's drug convictions? All black men. Even in towns where black residents made up less than 20% of the population. Delaney frowned. That wasn't law enforcement. That was a hunt. Cut to Grayson's private dinner with key donors. A round table of men in dark suits and deeper pockets. "We push the new initiative next month," Grayson said, slicing into his steak. "Tougher sentencing for drug crimes, mandatory minimums, and expanded police discretion." One donor laughed. "That's a long way of saying make arrests easier." Grayson didn't even blink. "Exactly." They all laughed. Another chimed in. "This Sawyer guy, the one you nailed, he'll be the face of it?" Grayson raised his glass. "Already is." But as the wine flowed, a single alert buzzed on Grayson's phone. A news app. A headline. Civil rights attorney questions validity of DA's latest drug bust. He scoffed and closed it. "Let them talk," he muttered. "They always do." But there was something different this time. That civil rights attorney? He wasn't just any lawyer. He was Elliot's godfather. Back in Elliot's cell, the guard passed a message under the door. A small slip of paper. Elliot unfolded it. Just one line. "He's already reaching out." Elliot nodded to himself. Good. The next phase was coming. Flashback, 1 year earlier. A boardroom in D.C. quiet, dimly lit. 3 men in suits, their expressions unreadable. Across from them sat Elliot Sawyer. But he wasn't in a hoodie or sneakers. He wore a federal badge. Special Agent Elliot Sawyer, tasked with a classified internal investigation into systemic racial corruption in Southern prosecution systems. Target, Grayson McCall. Back in Georgia, Grayson stared at Elliot's file. "Systems analyst?" he muttered. More like street-level dealer with a tech hobby. He tossed the file onto the desk. But if he'd read more carefully, he'd notice something strange. No employer listed, just a shell corporation. No emergency contact, no verified address. It should have raised alarms. But Grayson never looked at his prey that closely. He didn't have to. Until now. Officer Delaney printed the case summaries, spread them out on her desk. Same MO, same timeline, same zip codes, different man, same end. She circled each mugshot. 11 faces, all gone, all locked up, all connected to Grayson McCall. Her heart raced. This wasn't just bad policing. It was a playbook. And Elliot Sawyer? He wasn't a random arrest. He was a threat. That night, Grayson drove home in his black SUV, radio humming with praise from a conservative talk show. And let me tell you, folks, this McCall guy, he's the real deal. We need more prosecutors like him who aren't afraid to get their hands dirty and keep our streets clean. Grayson grinned. Let them talk. Let them chant his name. He was winning. And Elliot Sawyer? Just another notch on his belt. Another pawn. Another black man with no power. But behind Grayson's car, far back, 2 taillights followed. Unmarked. Silent. Watching. Recording. Back in the dark of the precinct cell, Elliot Sawyer sat still. Hands folded. Eyes focused. He whispered to himself. He's arrogant. That's his weakness. Then he leaned back against the wall and smiled. Because Grayson McCall was about to learn. He hadn't arrested a pawn. He had walked into a trap. Midnight. A soft knock on the frosted glass door of the law office echoed like a gunshot in the silence. Public Defender Jonah Reed looked up from a pile of case files, exhaustion carving shadows beneath his eyes. He wasn't expecting anyone. He never worked this late, not unless something felt off. And Elliot Sawyer? Everything about that case felt radioactive. Jonah rose slowly and peeked through the blinds. A man stood on the other side, plain clothes, hoodie pulled low, eyes sharp and scanning. Jonah opened the door halfway. "Can I help you?" The man didn't step inside, just slipped a hand into his coat and held out a small object. A flash drive. "No names," the man said, voice low. Controlled. Just watch what's on this. Before it's too late. Jonah's heart thudded. Who sent you? But the man was already gone, vanished into the night like smoke. Inside the office, Jonah sat back down. His laptop booted up with a faint hum. He slid the flash drive into the port, clicked the folder marked McCall, suppressed evidence. What he saw turned his blood cold. Video 1. Body cam footage, timestamp from 2019. A black teenager pulled over for a broken tail light. The tail light wasn't broken, but the bag of heroin planted under the seat? It showed up minutes after a plainclothes officer whispered something to the arresting cop. Next clip, a lab report digitally altered. Time of drug test results changed. Substance logged as cocaine when it was flour. Then came transcripts. Dozens. Emails between officers and McCall's office. Make sure this one sticks. He's a repeat. Boost the weight. Judge won't ask questions. File it anyway. Jonah scrolled faster. One folder was labeled Collateral. Use if they push back. He clicked. Photos of family members. Bank statements. Personal texts. Blackmail material. Grayson McCall had an entire machine. Not a prosecutor. A predator. The office door creaked open behind him. Jonah jumped, heart slamming. It was Elliot, still in cuffs, flanked by a quiet, nervous officer who'd brought him from holding for a meeting. The guard quickly closed the door and left without a word. Elliot stepped into the room and looked at Jonah's screen. He saw the open file, the paused footage, the disbelief on Jonah's face. Then Jonah turned to him slowly. "Tell me," he said hoarsely, "who are you really?" Elliot didn't smile, didn't blink. He just said, "Let's just say, I'm here to clean house." Jonah couldn't stop staring. This wasn't a scared client. This was a man with a plan. Calculated. Composed. Watching everything. "You planned this," Jonah whispered. Elliot nodded once. "He's hurt a lot of people. I needed him to come after me." "You baited McCall?" "Yes." "You had all this?" Jonah motioned to the screen. "You could have ended him any time. Not without exposing the system," Elliot said quietly. "And not without proof. Now we have it." Jonah sat back, still stunned. This could bring down his whole office. That's the point. But just as he reached to remove the drive, the lights flickered. The office plunged into darkness. Then, a crash. Glass shattering from the back window. "Stay here," Elliot said sharply. He rushed toward the source of the sound. Jonah grabbed his phone, heart pounding. He fumbled with the flashlight. But before he could even stand, something struck him. Hard. Blackness. Have you subscribed to our channel yet? Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. Morning. The law office looked like a crime scene. Papers scattered. A broken window. A blood trail. Paramedics wheeled Jonah Reed out on a stretcher, still unconscious. No witnesses. No signs of forced entry on the main door. And the flash drive? Gone. Elliot stood nearby, flanked by two officers. No longer cuffed, but still being watched closely. He said nothing. He didn't panic. But in his eyes, the storm had begun. Across town, Grayson McCall sipped coffee from a gleaming white mug and watched the news. Local public defender hospitalized in possible office break-in. No suspects yet. He smirked. "The timing is unfortunate," he said, tapping his screen. His aide, a young woman barely out of law school, stood nearby. "Should we delay the press release about the Sawyer indictment?" "No," Grayson said coolly. "Double down. Tell them he assaulted a public official in custody." "But he didn't." Grayson's stare shut her up instantly. He raised his brow. "Do you want to argue with a man who wins elections, or learn how to get one?" She swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." "Good." Later that day, in a dim parking garage 3 levels underground, a man leaned against a pillar, hidden in shadow. The same man who had given Jonah the flash drive. A burner phone buzzed in his hand. He answered. They took the bait. Reads out cold. The drive is gone. A pause on the line. Then, did they copy the contents? No. I watched. He only opened it. Didn't duplicate it. Then we've got a problem. Silence. Do you want me to extract Sawyer? No, the voice said flatly. He knew this was a risk. He's improvising now. And if McCall figures it out, he won't. Not yet. Another beat. Stay close. If the drive resurfaces, we move. The line clicked off. Inside the hospital, Jonah lay in a dim room, hooked to IVs, machines beeping softly. The nurse wrote something on his chart and stepped away. Elliot, dressed now in civilian clothes, slipped in quietly. He stood at Jonah's bedside and looked down at the bandaged head. "You did good," he murmured. "Just hang in there." He placed something on the table. A second flash drive, identical to the first. Elliot tapped it gently with one finger and whispered, "He thinks he's playing chess, but I'm building the board." He turned and disappeared down the hallway before anyone saw him. At the DA's office, Grayson stood before a wall of cameras, reporters packed in tight. "My team is committed to accountability, justice, and swift action. Mr. Sawyer's arrest is just the beginning of a larger investigation into organized narcotics in this county." A reporter raised a hand. "But there are whispers about missing evidence in his case." Grayson's smile tightened. "Only whispers, and I assure you, they'll stay that way." But even as he spoke, his assistant approached from the side and whispered into his ear. His face froze. "Sir, Elliot Sawyer has been released on a court order. No bail. Judge overturned the holding request." Grayson's eyes narrowed. "What? He walked out 10 minutes ago." "No, he didn't. Not without my signature. He didn't need yours." The order came from higher up. Grayson turned back to the reporters, face flushing. But he had a fake calm, smile through the fire. Because in that moment, the DA finally felt it. He wasn't in control anymore. Back in his apartment, Elliot peeled off his jacket, sat at a desk, opened a laptop. He pulled up a secure drive, loaded the second flash. Every file was intact. Every name, every doctored image, every false conviction. And in the corner of the screen, a blinking red dot, uploading to a cloud server, to encrypted drives, to newsrooms across the country. Grayson thought he had stolen the evidence, but Elliot had only let him think that, because this wasn't about escaping charges. This was about burning the whole system down. Grayson McCall stood in his glass-walled office, hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the cityscape like a general surveying a battlefield. But his mind wasn't on the view. It was on the man who wouldn't break. Elliot Sawyer. The name gnawed at him now. "He's too quiet," Grayson muttered. "Too controlled." His assistant, nervous and young, shuffled beside him. "Sir." Grayson turned, eyes hard. "I've dealt with drug lords, gang leaders, corrupt judges. They scream, beg, get sloppy. But Sawyer..." He stepped closer, voice low. Sawyer just watches. A long pause. Grayson clenched his jaw. "Get him out of county holding. I want him in Blackridge. Maximum security. Solitary." The assistant blinked. "That's a federal tier facility." "I don't care," Grayson snapped. "Call in favors. Pull strings. Make up a transfer order. I want him isolated. Today." But elsewhere, Elliot Sawyer was 2 moves ahead. Inside the cold cement walls of the county holding cell, Elliot sat cross-legged on the thin mattress. Calm, breathing slow, eyes closed. Then, the steel door bust. 2 guards entered. "Sawyer, let's go." No cuffs, no struggle. Elliot stood and followed. He didn't ask where they were taking him. He already knew. Outside, the prison transfer van sat waiting, engine idling. Unmarked, gray, nondescript. 2 men in correctional uniforms opened the back. One grunted, "Blackridge. Orders from the top." Elliot nodded, stepped inside. The doors slammed shut behind him, locking him in darkness. High above them, in the sky where no one looked, a silent drone hovered, no louder than a whisper on the wind. Its tiny camera lens zoomed in, tracking every movement. Noticed the men, noticed the uniforms, noticed the badge numbers, which didn't match any known registry, because they weren't real. Inside the van, Elliot sat in silence for 3 minutes. Then, the driver spoke into an earpiece. "Package secured. Phase 2 initiated." The man beside him responded with a smile. "Boss said he'd make it easy. This is too easy." Then he hit a button. The van's security cameras blinked. Off. A panel behind Elliot creaked open. And just like that, the back wall of the van moved, folded open, revealing a second compartment. With lights. Gear, a laptop, a satellite phone, and another man. Welcome back, Agent Sawyer. Elliot smiled faintly. Right on schedule. 2 blocks away, a secondary decoy van peeled off the route. Same license plate, same make, same uniformed actors. Only that one was empty. Just a tracker in the back seat, feeding data to anyone watching. A digital ghost trail. At the DA's office, Grayson watched a screen inside the surveillance room. GPS markers. Route logs. They're en route. A deputy confirmed. ETA to Blackridge in 38 minutes. Grayson nodded. Good. When he's inside, I want full lockdown. I want visitors denied. No lawyers. No phones. Nothing. He turned, but something inside him twisted. A feeling he hated. Doubt. 37 minutes later. Panic. The first call came from Blackridge. No transfer received. What do you mean? Grayson barked. There's no van. No prisoner. No record of a transfer en route. Grayson's face went pale. He spun toward the tech. Track the van. Now. The screen flickered. Signal lost. 10 minutes ago. Officers scrambled. Phones rang. Grayson yelled into radios. Call State Patrol. Air units. Highways. Set up checkpoints. His voice cracked with rage. He's not just some dealer. He's playing us. He's playing me. But no one had answers. Because Elliot Sawyer was no longer in custody. He had vanished. At a safe house miles away, Elliot stood before a whiteboard covered in notes, photos, timelines, and red lines. A map of the DA's web, corrupt officers, paid judges, bribe lab techs, sealed files. It looked like a spider's nest. He turned to his team, 4 operatives, each with years in intelligence. This is where we go surgical, Elliot said. McCall will panic. He'll lash out, but that's what we want. One woman stepped forward. What about the decoy van? Let it keep running the route, Elliot replied. Make it believable. Let the system chase shadows. He glanced at the clock. And now, he added, we hit him where he breathes. Back at the DA's office, Grayson paced like a caged animal. He escaped. A federal-level transfer. And he escaped. His chief of staff shook his head. There was no distress signal. No wreck. No sign of tampering. Grayson stopped pacing, then growled. Unless there was no transfer. The room went silent. He looked at his aide. What if that wasn't our van? Her lips parted. Sir, then that means... Grayson gritted his teeth. We've been compromised. On his desk, his computer screen blinked. New email. No sender. No subject. He clicked it. A video file. Play me. He hesitated, then clicked. And there, in crystal clear footage, was the transfer van. A drone's eye view, showing the license plate, the badge numbers, the faces of the fake officers, and Elliot Sawyer calmly stepping into the back of the van, followed by the compartment opening mid-transit, followed by his exit. Grayson's heart stopped. This wasn't surveillance footage from his team. This was surveillance footage of his team, taken by Elliot's people. Then, the screen flickered again. A message appeared in bold white text. Your move. Grayson slammed his fists on the desk, shattering the keyboard. Get me everybody. I want this man hunted. But his voice was hollow, because the walls were closing in. He had thought he was running the game. But Elliot Sawyer was rewriting the entire rulebook. Across town, Elliot sat beneath a flickering lamp. On his laptop, a database opened. Dozens of files, dozens of names, each one connected to a man whose life had been stolen by Grayson McCall's corruption. He clicked on the first name, Malcolm Rains, sentenced for a crime he didn't commit, evidence planted, testimony coerced, time served, 11 years. Elliot opened a secure line. It's time, he said into the mic, start contacting the victims. The real ones. A pause, and prepare the next drop. On Grayson's desk, his phone vibrated again. Another anonymous email. This time it had a list. Names, dates, case numbers, convictions, and a final line at the bottom. We're just getting started. The cameras flashed like 1,000 lightning bolts. Grayson McCall adjusted his tie in a mirror backstage. The silk glinted under the fluorescent lights. He exhaled once, twice, then stepped toward the podium like a man walking into a blaze. The crowd of reporters stood waiting, their faces a blur behind lenses and blinking red lights. Every major local and national station was tuned in. Grayson gripped the edge of the podium and flashed his most practiced smile. "Ladies and gentlemen of the press, thank you for being here. I know there have been rumors." His voice was steady, almost bored, but I want to make one thing perfectly clear. This office stands firmly against crime, against drugs, against violence, and we will not be intimidated by conspiracy theories or slanderous distractions. He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Mr. Elliot Sawyer is a known felon." Bzzzt. A sound interrupted him, not from the podium, from every phone in the room. Buzzing, dinging, lighting up at once. Dozens of journalists looked down at their screens, then gasped. A woman's voice trembled. "Is this real?" Another reporter raised his phone toward the crowd. "Turn to Channel 9. Now." Grayson's face twitched. He turned to the side monitor, watching in real time as the emergency report took over the live feed. Breaking news. Secret documents linked to Grayson McCall to evidence tampering, witness coercion, and unlawful convictions. His mouth went dry. On screen, grainy black and white surveillance footage played. It was him, standing over a trembling teenage boy in an interrogation room. "You signed the statement, or you rot," Grayson's voice barked through the speakers. The timestamp was from 2016. The boy was later sentenced to 20 years. No lawyer, no appeal. Another clip played. Grayson again, this time in a parking garage, stuffing an envelope into a detective's pocket. "Make sure the powder shows up in the glove box. I want the arrest before Friday." The footage was time-stamped only 7 months ago. Reporters exploded into questions. "Mr. McCall, is this true? Who were you framing? Are you stepping down?" He backed away from the podium, mic squealing, heart thundering. He didn't answer. He couldn't, because someone had just ripped the mask off. 2 floors above the press room, Grayson's private phone rang. He stormed into his office, slamming the door behind him. "Hello," a gravelly voice answered. Calm, cold, familiar. "Grayson, we have a problem." It was his fixer, the man who cleaned messes, made things disappear, who once buried a grand jury file in a swamp. "How the hell did they get this?" Grayson screamed, pacing like a madman. "Someone's inside," the fixer growled. "Has to be. You got a leak. Then plug it." Grayson barked. "We're trying," the fixer said. "But this isn't amateur work. This is government-grade infiltration. This is surgical." There was a pause. Then, almost like a whisper, "You pissed off the wrong ghost." Miles away, the real storm was brewing in silence. Inside a dim, high-tech command center disguised as an abandoned warehouse, Elliot Sawyer sat in front of a bank of screens. Each one pulsed with data, live feeds, news alerts, intercepted calls, facial recognition sweeps. He calmly removed a small mic from the lining of his jacket collar. Tiny, inconspicuous, powerful. He placed it gently on the steel table beside him, then looked to his team. Package delivered. The hacker grinned. "Half the internet thinks Grayson's already in cuffs." "Good," Elliot said. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a black badge wallet. He opened it slowly. The gold glint of the FBI insignia caught the light. But there was more. A laminated insert. A seal. A clearance level. Elliot Sawyer wasn't just undercover. He was assigned. Flashback, 18 months earlier. A quiet briefing room in Quantico, Virginia. A wall-sized screen glowed with dossiers and mugshots. Names scrolled. A sickening patter emerged. All black. All male. All prosecuted by Grayson McCall. A man in a tailored suit leaned on the desk. This guy's a ghost behind a mask. Publicly spotless. Privately, a predator. He turned to Elliot. "We need someone who can get close. Become bait." Elliot didn't flinch. "I'm in." Back in the present, Elliot stood over a map of the city, red pins marking every past conviction tied to Grayson's network. "Drop phase 2 in 90 minutes, he said. The woman at the laptop nodded. Confirmed. Internal audio files, case leak number 2, and the witness recanting testimony from 22, all queued for the next upload. "Good," Elliot said. "He's unraveling." Meanwhile, Grayson was falling apart. Back at his estate, the wine glass in his hand trembled. The fixer's voice came through on speaker. Your phones are bugged. Your office too. Emails, files, encrypted drives. They have everything. Grayson's voice cracked. Ow! Silence. Then, you ever wonder why Sawyer never lawyered up? Why he never called family? Why he didn't flinch when we pinned drugs on him? Grayson froze. The fixer said what Grayson had been too scared to think. He let you catch him. Across the city, Elliot stared out a cracked window as night fell. Rain tapped against the pane in soft, steady beats. The silence was electric. His team moved like clockwork. One agent edited a new video package. Another connected a secure call with a federal prosecutor. A third monitored online traffic as the leaks went viral. Elliot's fingers hovered over a keyboard. He typed in a command. /expose _ Grayson _0 2 _ upload _now /. Then he whispered, more to himself than anyone. Let's turn the heat up. Have you subscribed to our channel yet? Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. On news screens across the country, a second wave hit. This time, not just documents. Witnesses, former cops, secret recordings, audio of a terrified mother saying Grayson threatened her son into a false confession. Every file watermarked with the same cryptic stamp. Courage is coming. Grayson collapsed onto his couch as his phone exploded with calls. The governor, his campaign manager, his wife. He didn't answer any. Instead, he sat in the dark, sweating, his whole world burning. Because the man he tried to frame wasn't just innocent. He was the executioner, and the clock was still ticking. He wasn't Elliot Sawyer. Not really. That name belonged to the persona, a shadow woven from fragments of half-truths, fabricated history, and government-grade cover stories. The man behind the alias? Special Agent Elijah Ramsey, FBI. Codename, Falcon. For the past 14 months, he had lived, breathed, and moved as Elliot Sawyer, blending into a system he was sent to dismantle from the inside. And now, the veil was gone. The command center pulsed with dim blue light. Screens glowed. Agents moved in silence. And at the center of it all stood Elliot, or rather, Elijah, staring at a wall of evidence. His voice was low but resolute. It's time we stop playing nice. His mission had been clear from the start. Infiltrate Grayson McCall's world, uncover proof of racially motivated misconduct, and bring down the entire crooked chain from the inside. The FBI had been watching Georgia's low-conviction towns for years, noticing patterns in sentencing. Grayson's district? Red flagged. Repeatedly. Young black men disproportionately charged. Evidence mysteriously found. Confessions obtained without legal counsel. Cases that didn't add up, but couldn't be questioned. Until now. Until him. Flashback, 15 months ago. Quantico, Virginia. A secure briefing room. The words echoed off the glass walls. You'll be alone. Elijah looked across the table at the assistant director. No backup. No badge. No name. Just you, a burner, and a story that'll hold under fire. He nodded once. I've done harder. This one's different, the director warned. You're not infiltrating a gang. You're walking into a system. Corruption isn't on the fringes. It's the foundation. And McCall? He's not sloppy. He's calculated. Elijah leaned back, confident. Then I'll become the equation he never solved. For over a year, he kept the act seamless. Worked a government tech job in Savannah. Real enough to pass background checks. Fake enough to allow for sudden disappearances. No family. No personal life. He dated casually, always distantly. Just enough to look normal. He volunteered on weekends. Filed his taxes. Attended community cookouts and nodded politely to officers at checkpoints. And then, he waited until Grayson's web caught up to him. The arrest? Planned. From the vehicle randomly chosen, a rental flag by one of Elijah's handlers, to the cocaine planted inside it, laced with chemicals known to be traced back to previous McCall cases. Everything had been controlled. Every step. Even a moment when Officer Cartwright smirked as he clicked the cuffs. Elijah let it all happen, because sometimes, the only way to burn a house down is from inside. The flash drive? A decoy. loaded with carefully curated breadcrumbs, some true, most not, that baited Grayson's people into overplaying their hand. They took the flash drive. They silenced the lawyer, exactly as predicted. But the real intel? It had never left Elijah's encrypted satellite uplink, stored remotely through layers of shadow systems only the Bureau could access. Grayson thought he'd erased the threat, but what he'd actually done was confirm the pattern. And now he knew. Now Grayson understood this wasn't just some unlucky black man he could silence. This was a war, and Elijah was no pawn. He was the blade. Grayson McCall leaned over his whiskey glass, his mind unraveling by the minute. Across his desk lay the latest leak. Footage of him coercing a woman into pinning her son's murder on a rival gang member. He recognized the timestamp. He remembered the conversation. He also remembered the bug he later found in that office, after the conversation was long over. He'd underestimated Elliot Sawyer. No, he'd underestimated whoever the hell Sawyer really was. He clenched his jaw. If you want a war, he muttered, he's got one. His fixer was already 3 steps ahead. Back-channel calls, payoffs, judges he could squeeze, dirty cops ready to do anything if the price was right. The fixer's voice crackled through the encrypted line. We're not taking him out. Not yet. We expose him first. Ow! Grayson spat. We leak his truth. Real name. Real ties. Then we say the FBI targeted a noble DA for political reasons. Election season. Weaponized justice. It'll work. And if it doesn't, Grayson asked. There was a pause. Then a chilling reply. Then we do what we've always done. Back at the warehouse, Elijah sat in stillness, his face unreadable. He watched Grayson's every digital move. Phones, email, even encrypted messengers. His team had tapped it all. He knew what they were planning, and he welcomed it. They're going to try to out me, he said. The analyst beside him looked up. Do we stop them? Elijah shook his head. No, let them expose me. The team stared. I need McCall desperate, unhinged. When he thinks he's in control, he makes mistakes. He turned toward the screen again. I'm not hiding anymore. That night, every major news outlet received a tip. Anonymous. Untraceable. Subject line, the man who wasn't Elliot Sawyer. Attached, government-grade intel. A resume that didn't exist. Military commendations. Bureau credentials. Academy transcripts. All accurate. All meant to surface. Grayson thought he'd found a weapon, but it was another trap. One Elijah set himself. And it worked. Social media erupted. Hashtag Who is Elliot Sawyer trended nationwide. Conspiracy theorists spun tales. Some called him a CIA ghost. Others thought he was part of a rogue whistleblower group. But one thing was certain. He wasn't the criminal Grayson painted him to be. And now, the public was asking questions. Uncomfortable questions. Grayson's campaign donations dipped overnight. Protesters gathered outside his office the next morning. And inside, he stared at his reflection, the pressure tightening like a noose. He grabbed his phone. Activate Plan Bingo. Across town, Elijah got the ping. Plan Bingo. He turned to his team. They're going to frame a federal agent. Again, someone asked. No, Elijah said, standing. This time, they're going to try to kill one. The order came with no hesitation. Shoot on sight. Grayson McCall stood in the shadows of his private office, barking commands into a burner phone. I don't want him arrested. I don't want him brought in. I want him gone. His voice cold. Final. The man on the other end, one of the quiet ones on the force, paused. That's not legal. Grayson's tone darkened. Neither is what he's doing. He hung up before a reply could come. By morning, a new narrative had spread like wildfire. Fugitive terrorist posing as federal agent, armed and dangerous, maybe targeting public officials. And at the center of it all, Elliot Sawyer, or as the Whisper Networks now called him, the Ghost. The press only had pieces. The truth was slippery, distorted. But that was Grayson's move. Create noise, confusion, then eliminate the problem in the chaos. A fake intel leak went out. A remote warehouse outside Macon. He's hiding here, the anonymous source said. Armed, surrounded by loyalists. Within hours, a SWAT team mobilized. Helicopters, tactical trucks, military-grade firepower, all for a single man. They stormed the location at dawn, doors blown, flashbangs deployed. Go, go, go. But when the smoke cleared, they weren't pointing rifles at Elliot Sawyer. They were surrounded by FBI agents, weapons raised, badges up, and right in the middle, standing with the calm of a man 10 moves ahead, was Assistant Director Miriam Hale. FBI, steel gray suit, steadier nerves. She didn't flinch as red lasers trained on her. She simply lifted a hand. "This facility," she said, voice echoing, "is under federal jurisdiction." The lead SWAT commander blinked. "What?" Hale's eyes narrowed. "You've been used." Back at the Bureau's mobile command center, Elijah watched the footage roll in. The trap that was meant to kill him? Neutralized. Publicly. Elegantly. He leaned back in a leather chair, folding his hands under his chin. "Stage 1, he said. Complete." At that same moment, Grayson's office door flew open. Assistant Director Hale stepped in with her security escort. She didn't wait for pleasantries. "You just sent armed officers into a federal operation. Without coordination. Without a warrant." Grayson stood from behind his desk, playing calm. "I was pursuing a fugitive. A dangerous one." She stepped forward. "Elliot Sawyer is not a fugitive. He's my agent." Grayson's jaw twitched. "So it's true. It's more than true. It's federally protected jurisdiction. And you just walked into a crime scene of your own making." Grayson's lips curved slightly, the politician in him flickering back to life. "This conversation is over." But as she turned to leave, Hale left him with a single sentence. "You're not above this anymore." Later that night, Grayson couldn't sleep. The pressure was tightening. He was losing grip, losing face. His fixer's voice rang in his head. "Make it disappear before it becomes too real." So he did what desperate men do. He broke rules, and then he shattered them. Under moonlight, a black SUV crept through the trees toward a known Bureau safe house, just off the beaten path near Atlanta. It was one of the last addresses connected to Elliot's alias. Grayson had scrubbed the surveillance before the Bureau could reassign it. No warrant, no uniform, just him and 2 loyal enforcers. Men he paid handsomely to never ask questions. They broke in through the back, guns drawn, breath tight. The place looked abandoned, silent, dust floating in beams of light. Grayson motioned forward. They cleared the hall, then entered the main room, and froze. The walls, every single one, covered in photos of Grayson, from a courtroom, from his home, for his golf club, his mistress's apartment, his campaign stops, photos from angles no civilian could have taken. Maps, timestamps, traffic logs, wiretap transcripts, bank records, illegally sealed court files, annotated in red. One wall had only a single title, stenciled across in black. "The McCall file." One of the men whispered, "What the—" Grayson stumbled forward, blinking in disbelief. A video monitor flickered to life. A paused frame. Him threatening a young black man in a holding cell, caught years ago, off record, never leaked. He reached out to touch it, then recoiled. He turned. Another wall, this one with a single line of handwritten script. "We see you." Grayson backed away, breathing sharp now. "This is a setup," he snapped. But his voice cracked. He knew. Deep down, he knew. This wasn't improvised. This had been waiting for him. He was never the hunter. He was always the hunted. He looked around once more. And for the first time in his career, Grayson McCall felt fear. Real, bone-deep, disorienting fear. "What is this?" he whispered. But no one answered, because the room itself already had. The video hit the internet at 7:12 a.m. No warning, no leaks, just a black screen that flickered to life, then a steady, calm voice. Elliot Sawyer, facing the camera. No disguise, no shadows, just him, his eyes steady, his voice calm. But his words? They cut like steel. For too long, the justice system has failed to serve everyone equally. But today, that changes. The video was only 90 seconds, but that was all it took. By 8:03 a.m., it was trending across every platform. Hashtag Justice for All, hashtag McCall Files, hashtag Elliot Sawyer. By 8:10, it was on CNN. By 8:32, hundreds of people were gathered outside the DA's office in Augusta, Georgia. By 9 o'clock, it was a movement. The crowd wasn't quiet. They didn't come for handshakes and civility. They came with rage, and phones, and cardboard signs inked in urgency. We want truth. Free the wrongfully convicted. Grayson must pay. They chanted. They screamed. But they stayed. And from the fourth-floor window of his office, Grayson McCall watched it unfold. His hand shook. For the first time in his career, he couldn't spin it. There were no press statements, no legal maneuvering that could drown this fire. The mob didn't believe in spin. They believed in evidence. And Elliot Sawyer had given them plenty. At exactly 10:04 a.m., a convoy of federal marshals swept through downtown like a hammer. They didn't knock. They didn't ask. They walked right through the DA's front doors. Grayson was in mid-conference with his legal team when the lead marshal said 6 words. "Grayson McCall, you're under federal arrest." Gasps. Chaos. One lawyer tried to argue. Another tried to block the marshals. Didn't matter. They cuffed him right there. And for the first time in a decade, the smug smile disappeared. Cameras outside captured every second. The crowd roared as the door opened and Grayson was dragged down the steps. Reporters screamed questions. Someone threw a shoe. Another held up a sign with Elliot's face and the words, "Thank you." The fall wasn't just public. It was historic, live-streamed to millions. Inside jail, Grayson sat behind the reinforced glass, pale and silent. He didn't ask for a phone call, didn't speak to his lawyer, didn't even blink when they read him the charges. Conspiracy, fraud, falsification of legal documents, civil rights violations, obstruction of justice, criminal racketeering. Each word hit like a punch. And in every courtroom around the country, people watched it play out like the drama it was. The powerful DA, once untouchable, now just another name on docket. The town split like cracked pavement. Some cheered openly, loudly. Old cases were reopened. Wrongfully imprisoned men were contacted. Lawsuits flew like bullets. Elliot's face appeared on murals, stickers, street art. He became a symbol. To some, a hero. To others, a traitor. Old money, deep power. The ones who'd profited off Grayson's rise. They fumed behind closed doors. How had one man brought it all down? The truth? He didn't. Not alone. Elliot Sawyer had simply been the blade. The strike. But behind him was the system that had watched silently for too long and finally decided to act. He wasn't the storm. He was the reckoning. Somewhere above the chaos, on a rooftop overlooking the courthouse, Elliot stood alone, dressed in black, hood over his head. The wind tugged at his coat, but he didn't move. He watched the crowds below, their fists raised, their chants loud. He didn't smile, didn't cry, didn't cheer, just stood there, emotionless, like a ghost watching his own story unfold. His phone buzzed. He didn't look right away, just exhaled, then pulled it from his coat. A single message flashed across the screen. New assignment. Another DA. Same game. He stared at it, let sit, then slid the phone back into his pocket and walked away from the edge. One city burned clean, another still rotting. Time to move. The motel room was silent. Too silent. Elliot folded his last shirt with mechanical precision and tucked it into the duffel bag. No wasted motion. No hesitation. Just focus. He zipped the bag shut, then paused. His reflection in the cracked mirror stared back, hollow, unreadable. The man in the mirror was clean-cut, sharp-jawed, calm. But behind his eyes, storms. The door creaked open behind him. He didn't have to look. He knew who it was. Naomi. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, eyes tired. She didn't speak at first. She didn't have to. The air between them was thick with memory. Pain. Regret. Choices made long ago. "You're leaving again?" she asked softly. Her voice wasn't angry. It was worse. It was weary. Elliot nodded once. "This one's bigger." Naomi stepped into the room, her boots echoing softly on the wooden floor. She looked at the duffel, then at him. "They said you might not come back last time." He didn't flinch, didn't blink. "They're usually right," he said. He slung the duffel over his shoulder and headed for the door. But just as he crossed the threshold, her voice stopped him cold. Do you ever wonder, she asked, if this life is changing you? That stopped him, not his feet, but something deeper. He didn't turn around, didn't respond, just stood there, for a full breath. Then two. He exhaled quietly, then walked out. The sky was bruised with dawn. Elliot moved like a shadow through the parking lot, toward a black SUV. He opened the door, tossed the bag in, and slid behind the wheel. The ignition hummed. The engine purred. As he pulled onto the empty road, the town behind him faded in the rearview mirror. Burned bridges, broken systems, shattered illusions. Ahead, another battleground, another snake pit wrapped in a smile. He passed a sign, "Welcome to Wickham County. Population, 12,402. He didn't flinch, just drove, eyes on the horizon, expression unreadable. But inside, gears were turning. Files, patterns, names. Another DA, another web of lies, another community strangled by injustice. He would tear it apart, from the inside, just like before. Elliot thinking aloud, his voice low, controlled, final. They think we're weak, that we don't fight back, that we'll just take it. But they forgot something. Some of us were never meant to be framed. Some of us were made to expose the game. Here are some questions for you, our viewers. Do you think Elliot went too far? Or not far enough? If you found out someone like Grayson was running your local justice system, what would you do? Last question, was Elliot a hero or a villain with a badge? Share your thoughts with us in the comment section. Hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss our upcoming stories.